Imagine a clash so monumental it reverberates beyond the hallowed halls of Tinseltown and into the raw, unvarnished arena of bare-knuckle politics. Picture Richard Gere, Hollywood's undisputed king of romance, whose smouldering gaze once made the world swoon in Pretty Woman, suddenly abandoning the velvet ropes of the red carpet, not for another blockbuster, not for a meditative retreat in the Himalayas, but to dive headfirst into the drama-filled battlefield of Washington, D.C.'s cutthroat political landscape. But hold on, this isn't just any foray. His opponent isn't a seasoned senator or a veteran diplomat. No, Gere's adversary is none other than Karoline Leavitt, a razor-sharp, 27-year-old conservative firebrand. She's a whirlwind of calculated confidence, a digital native disruptor who wields a microphone like a weapon, ready to turn every attack into ashes, every slight into a strategic advantage. Who will stand tall in this electrifying war of words that's setting social media ablaze and threatening to expose the deepest rifts in America? On one side, a silver screen legend, his presence radiating a meditative calm, seemingly prepared to preach compassion from a lofty perch. On the other, a conservative powerhouse dominating the White House briefing room, a voice for a movement that values grit over glamour. This isn't just a discussion, it's a showdown, a clash of titans where reputation and political futures hang in the balance. The studio of the American Pulse lights up, a dazzling spectacle of LED panels shifting colors rapidly. The audience's applause roaring like an opening signal in a coliseum. The air crackles with an almost visible electricity. Every person holds their breath, sensing the magnitude of the moment. Cameras pan quickly, their lenses hungry, ready to capture anything that could become a historic, viral sensation. The host steps out, his smile somewhat forced, betraying a hint of unease. He seems to sense something unusual, something almost preordained about tonight's show. "Welcome to the American Pulse," his voice booms, a forced enthusiasm barely masking his trepidation. "Tonight, we have two ideals clashing, two worlds colliding. Richard Gere, cinematic icon and global humanitarian, versus Karoline Leavitt, America's youngest conservative star and a force to be reckoned with. Don't look away, ladies and gentlemen. The drama starts now." As the studio lights dim, spotlighting the host at center stage, his voice rings out with forced excitement. In tonight's program, let's dive into a dialogue about the key issues shaping American society. Every perspective matters. Let's get started. The audience claps enthusiastically, cheers mixing with whispers as all eyes turn to Karoline Leavitt and Richard Gere at their opposing podiums. Half the audience is expecting an impassioned speech about compassion, the kind Gere often preaches in romantic films or at glamorous charity events. But tonight, Gere isn't here to play Hollywood saint. He stands tall, his gaze sweeping the audience, lingering a second too long on Karoline Leavitt, his expression unwavering. "Thank you all for being here," Gere begins, his voice warm and steady, like he's reciting lines from an old script. "I'm here to talk about hope, about humanity, about the world we can build together." The audience claps eagerly, some raising their phones to record, ready to post his golden words on social media. But then his tone drops, sharp and cold as a thin blade. "But how can we build hope when this country is led by those who only parrot the words of a dictator? When a young woman barely out of college stands before the world to cover up the truth?" The room falls silent. The camera pans quickly to Leavitt, capturing the moment she tilts her head slightly, her lips curling into an enigmatic smile. Gere continues, his voice now laced with sarcasm. "Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, is the embodiment of failure. A 27-year-old girl, never tested by the harsh realities of politics, tasked with polishing brutal policies. She's not a spokesperson, she's an actress, but this role is too big for her. The crowd murmurs, a few chuckles rising from the Hollywood supporters. Fueled by the response, Gere points at Leavitt, his eyes glinting with smugness. She pops up on TikTok, posting sound bites as slick as toothpaste ads, and calls it communication. She flaunts her lace dress, made in China, as if it's a national achievement. Meanwhile, her administration tramples human rights, divides the country, and turns America into a global laughingstock. The audience reacts more strongly. A group in the front row claps, but most of the room grows quiet, sensing the audacity of Gere's words. The host, sweat beading on his forehead, tries to interject. "Thank you, Mr. Gere, but we should—" But Gere ignores him, his voice soaring like he's delivering a climactic scene in a movie. "I've traveled the world, witnessed people fighting for freedom. I've stood with activists in Tibet while Miss Leavitt was busy spinning fairy tales about condoms in Gaza. She doesn't represent America. She's a tool for a man who only knows how to shout into a microphone." Leavitt doesn't flinch, but her smile sharpens like a blade honed for battle. The stage transformed, no longer a mere talk show set, but an arena. The spotlight, as if drawn by an invisible magnet, beamed intensely on Karoline Leavitt as she rose from her seat. Microphone in hand, she stood tall, her eyes blazing like an unquenchable fire, a stark contrast to Gere's initial smugness. He remained seated across from her, arms crossed, his triumphant glance lingering, as if he had already pinned Leavitt as a naive, forgettable supporting role in his grand narrative. He had underestimated her, and the audience, swept up by his scathing speech, now fell silent, sensing an entirely new electricity in the air. The host, sweat glistening on his brow, stammered, "Miss Leavitt, would you like to respond?" Leavitt tilted her head, her lips curving into a sharp, unflinching smile that held no warmth, only the promise of retribution. "I'll set the record straight," she declared, her voice clear and resonant. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, some immediately raising their phones to live-stream the moment on X, hungry for the impending fireworks. The camera zoomed in, catching every detail, from the almost imperceptible way she brushed a stray strand of hair from her face to the piercing glance she shot Gere like a fighter before a match. "Mr. Gere," she began, her voice smooth yet cutting like a freshly sharpened blade. "You say I'm too young, just a girl unfit for the political stage." Her words hung in the air, a direct challenge. "Let me remind you, Mr. Gere," she continued, her voice gaining power with every syllable, "youth isn't a weakness, it's a weapon." The audience erupted in applause, especially from the younger crowd in the back, a wave of vindication washing over them. Gere's brow furrowed, his composure beginning to crack, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on the armrest of his chair. "Youth," Leavitt pressed on, stepping forward, the spotlight now highlighting her confident stance, "is precisely why I'm not stuck in outdated ruts. At 27, I went from a White House intern to the youngest press secretary in American history." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Do you know what I did 4 days after giving birth? I stood before the nation, held a press conference, and defended President Trump under attack." Her voice rose, laced with defiant pride. "You call that inexperience? I call it dedication." The audience exploded. Applause drowned out the show's background music, a visceral roar of approval that shook the studio. Gere, feeling the pressure, stood, his voice lowering, trying to regain control. "Miss Leavitt, dedication doesn't replace experience. Politics isn't a playground for those who just follow orders. You're just a tool, parroting someone else's words without grasping the consequences." Leavitt laughed, a short, sharp sound that silenced the crowd in anticipation, a single, potent note of mockery. "A tool, Mr. Gere? If I'm a tool, what are you? an actor basking in the glory of last century's films, thinking a few trips to Tibet give you the right to judge all of America? She turned to the audience, her voice rising, a general addressing her troops. Mr. Gere, at 27, what were you doing? Chasing bit parts or meditating to escape reality? Meanwhile, I'm here, facing the media, facing the world, to protect the interests of the American people. The applause thundered, an unstoppable force. A group of young audience members began to chant, "Karoline! Karoline!" The camera panned to Gere, catching him pursing his lips, searching desperately for a comeback. His previously confident gaze now tinged with a dawning unease. "You're deflecting," Gere shot back, his voice now tinged with anger, his Hollywood charm dissolving. "Your youth is just recklessness. You don't understand the responsibility of a spokesperson, that your words can cause harm." Leavitt shook her head, her smile now tinged not with amusement but with pity. "Harm, Mr. Gere? The American people are the ones harmed by inflation, by unsecured borders, by failed policies that Hollywood elites like you never care about. I'm young, but I understand what they need. And you? What do you understand beyond preaching compassion from your $1 million mansion?" She raised her hand, as if inviting the audience to answer. "Tell me, Mr. Gere, what did you do for Americans at 27 that gives you the right to call me naive?" The audience leaped to their feet, cheers shaking the studio, a tide that Gere could not possibly stem. Gere opened his mouth, but his words were drowned out by the sheer volume of applause. The host, nearly panicked, tried to interject. We need to calm down." But Leavitt, eyes locked on Gere, pressed on. "Mr. Gere, my youth is my strength. I don't need 50 years to know how to fight. I learned from President Trump, a man who never bows." She paused, her voice dripping with finality. "And you? What did you learn from your heartthrob roles, besides how to act for the camera?" The camera caught Gere, his face now a mask of stunned realization, slowly sitting down, his eyes vacant as if he had just realized he had profoundly misjudged his opponent. Leavitt, standing center stage, raised the microphone like a warrior, hoisting a flag over a freshly conquered battlefield. "I'm not done," she declared, her voice low but commanding. "Mr. Gere wants to talk about experience. Let me show him what real experience looks like." The audience erupted again, a crescendo of cheers. The host, helpless, signaled the camera to pan to Gere, but the spotlight remained steadfastly on Leavitt. Gere, sensing he was losing ground, cleared his throat, trying to pivot. "Leavitt, we should talk about compassion, about responsibility to the world." But Leavitt cut him off, her eyes blazing like a torch. "Compassion? Fine, Mr. Gere. But first, let me teach you about responsibility to this country." The room shook with applause, and Gere, for the first time, looked like an actor who had forgotten his lines on the main stage, utterly thrown off script. Karoline Leavitt, standing in the eye of the storm, microphone glinting in her hand, looked like a general who had just won a decisive battle. The stage, still vibrating from Leavitt's seismic counterattack, remained an arena. The host, visibly rattled, sweat beading on his forehead, stammered, We need to move to a new topic. Mr. Gere, your thoughts on compassion in politics?" He was throwing Richard Gere a lifeline, a chance to pivot back to his comfort zone, to reclaim his Hollywood star poise. Gere stood, smoothing his jacket, attempting to re-establish the aura of the global activist who had once swayed the world. With his humanitarian efforts, he took a deep breath, his voice low but sharp, like he was playing a tragic lead in a poignant drama. "Compassion," he began, enunciating each syllable with the weight of a lecturing seminar, "is what America lacks. And Miss Leavitt, as the face of a ruthless administration, is proof of that absence." The audience fell silent, a few scattered, claps rising only from the most ardent Hollywood supporters, unsure of where this new offensive would lead. Gere pointed at Leavitt, his voice rising with a restrained fury that threatened to break through his composed facade. I've spent decades fighting for human rights, from the desperate refugee camps on the borders of Tibet to the crowded shelters in New York. I know what compassion is, Mr. Leavitt. But you stand behind the White House podium justifying divisive policies, deporting immigrants, and ignoring the world's cries for help. You don't know compassion. You only know how to follow orders from a man obsessed with money. The camera panned to Leavitt, capturing her slight lean forward, her lips pressed tight but her eyes burning like a warrior accepting a profound challenge. The host, sensing the explosive atmosphere, stammered again, "Miss Leavitt, would you like to respond?" Leavitt raised her hand, a simple gesture that nonetheless silenced him completely. Her voice, when it came, was clear but razor-sharp. "Compassion, Mr. Gere? You want to talk about compassion? Let me show you how real compassion differs from your Hollywood act." The audience gasped, a ripple of scattered applause spreading. As Leavitt stepped to the center of the stage, the spotlight highlighting her confident stance. "Mr. Gere," she began, her voice dripping with calculated disdain, "you brag about your Tibet trips, about your photos with activists. But do you know Americans are struggling with skyrocketing gas prices? You talk about refugee camps, but have you visited towns bankrupted by illegal immigration? Or are you too busy at Malibu galas to notice?" Gere furrowed his brow, trying to interrupt, his voice rising in indignation. "You're twisting my words. I've dedicated my life to the oppressed, and you just defend an administration that crushes the vulnerable." But Leavitt didn't let him continue. She raised her hand, her voice slicing through the air like a knife. "Crushing, Mr. Gere. The American people are the ones being crushed. By inflation, by crime, by failed policies you and your Hollywood friends never face. You call that compassion. I call it hypocrisy!" The audience erupted, cheers echoing through the studio, especially from the Trump supporters in the back. The camera caught a young audience member holding up a Karoline for President sign, a spontaneous rebellion against the established order. Gere, sensing he was losing ground, raised his voice, a desperate attempt to assert moral authority. "You have no right to talk about morality. I've stood for freedom, while you back an administration that shuts borders and abandons refugees." Leavitt smiled, but this smile was no longer gentle. It carried the force of a storm. "Freedom, Mr. Gere? You talk about freedom from your million-dollar mansion, while Americans lose jobs because of open borders. You pose with activists, post on Instagram, and call it dedication. Me, I stand before the world defending policies that bring jobs, security, and a future for Americans. That's real compassion, not the framed compassion of your editing room." Applause surged, the audience leaping to their feet, some shouting Leavitt's name. Gere tried to respond, his voice trembling. "You don't understand the meaning of compassion. You're just part of a political machine." But Leavitt shook her head, her tone now laced with pity, a final crushing blow. "A machine? Mr. Gere, the real machine is Hollywood, where you and your friends live in a luxury bubble, preaching morality, without knowing what Americans need. I may not have a mansion, but I have a heart for this country." The audience went wild, cheers drowning out the background music. The camera panned to Gere, capturing him sitting down, hands clenched, eyes vacant like an actor abandoned by his director. Leavitt, center stage, raised the microphone like a victorious warrior. "Mr. Gere," she said, her voice low but commanding, "if you want to talk about compassion, start by listening to Americans, not by taking photos in Tibet." The host, utterly desperate, interjected, "We need to change topics." But the audience didn't care. They kept clapping, their roars of approval cementing Leavitt's dominance in this devastating round. The stage lights blazed, reflecting Karoline Leavitt's victorious fire. Richard Gere, once a Hollywood icon, now looked like a defeated warrior, his eyes clouded, hands clenched as if grasping at fading glory. The host, his voice breaking like, He snapped string, made one final desperate attempt to regain control. Mr. Gere, Miss Leavitt, let's talk about policy. How did the current administration's policies impact America? Gere stood, his jacket rumpled, attempting to reclaim the poise of an activist who once swayed the world. But his voice, though steady, betrayed a deep well of desperation. Policy, he began, like reciting a memorized speech he no longer believed. Must serve people, truly serve them. But Miss Leavitt's administration, with its brutal policies, is tearing apart America's very soul. The audience fell silent, a few weak claps rising only from the Hollywood supporters, now visibly dwindling in number. Gere pointed at Leavitt, his voice trembling with a barely restrained fury. You justify mass deportations, border closures and trade wars that wreck the global economy. You're the face of an administration that only divides, abandons the vulnerable, and puts personal gain above human rights. You're not a spokesperson, Miss Leavitt. You're a cover for cruelty. The camera panned to Leavitt, capturing her slight. Nod, her lips pressed tight, but her eyes blazing like a warrior ready to land the final decisive blow. The host, nearly falling off his chair, stammered, Miss Leavitt, do you? But Leavitt raised her hand, silencing him. Her voice rang out, powerful as a victorious proclamation. Cruelty, Mr. Gere? You call protecting America cruelty? Let me show you how President Trump's policies and my role are saving America. The audience erupted, applause roaring like a stormy sea, ready to witness the final act of this stunning political drama. Leavitt stepped forward, the spotlight highlighting her unshakable pride. Mr. Gere, you criticize mass deportations. That's not division, it's security. Last year, 2.5 million illegal border crossings were recorded, per the Department of Homeland Security. Our policies cut that by 30%, bringing safety to American families. You call that cruelty? I call it responsibility. Gere tried to interrupt, his voice shaking. You're destroying the American dream. Those immigrants seek freedom, but you and Trump just build walls. But Leavitt didn't let him continue. She laughed, a sharp sound like a dagger finding its mark. The American dream, Mr. Gere? The American dream is jobs for citizens, not open borders letting criminals flood in. Thanks to Trump's policies, unemployment dropped to 3.8%, the lowest in a decade per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Got any numbers to counter that? Or do you just cry for freedom from your mansion? The audience roared with laughter. Cheers. Echoing, a group holding up a Trump 2024 sign. Gere, feeling cornered, raised his voice, a desperate, flailing gesture. You talk about jobs, but Trump's trade wars are killing the economy. Tariffs on China drive up prices, and the people are suffering. Leavitt shook her head, her eyes glinting with mockery. Trade wars, Mr. Gere? That's a trade victory. Our tariffs brought in $80 billion in revenue, per the Department of Commerce, and forced China to negotiate fairly. While you were busy posing with activists, we brought manufacturing jobs back to Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Do you know $500,000 jobs were created? Or were you too busy re-watching Pretty Woman to catch the news? Gere tried to respond, his voice now tinged with utter desperation. You just parrot Trump's numbers. You don't understand policy's impact on the poor, on human rights. But Leavitt raised her microphone, her voice ringing like a final verdict. Human rights, Mr. Gere? I understand the poor better than you think. I grew up in New Hampshire in a working-class family, not a Hollywood mansion. My role is to communicate policies that help Americans, from tax cuts to job growth to border security. What do you do for the poor besides red carpet speeches? The audience went wild, some shouting, Karoline! Karoline! The camera caught Gere, sitting down, his hands trembling slightly, eyes vacant like an actor abandoned by his director. Leavitt continued, her voice powerful yet captivating. Mr. Gere, Trump's policies are for America, and I'm proud to bring that message to millions. You call me a cover-up? No, I'm the one exposing the truth that Hollywood elites like you never want to hear, the audience erupted, applause drowning out the background music. Leavitt stood center stage, raising the microphone like an artist. Completing a masterpiece. Mr. Gere, she said, her voice low but commanding. If you want to talk about policy, come to the American people. Not from the red carpet, from reality. The host, nearly fainting, interjected, "Thank you both for your very strong points." Gere, completely silent, looked at Leavitt as if she had stolen his entire career. Outro, the aftershock and the ascendant. Star, the audience leaped to their feet, cheers roaring like a tsunami, overpowering the background music trying to close the show. Karoline Leavitt, center stage, waved with a victorious smile like a star who had just delivered a defining performance. Across from her, Gere sat motionless, eyes lost like a forgotten legend in front of millions of viewers. The camera panned over the audience, capturing excited faces, phones raised for live streams, and makeshift signs reading "Karoline Rules." The host, drenched in sweat, tried to wrap up with a faltering voice. "Thank you, Mr. Gere, Miss Leavitt, and our audience. A night to remember." But no one paid attention. The crowd kept chanting Leavitt's name. Some Hollywood supporters quietly left their seats, eyes dazed, as if they had just watched their idol crumble. Gere, with the demeanor of an actor cut from the script, stood and silently exited to the wings, not offering a goodbye. Meanwhile, Leavitt was mobbed by the crowd, reporters jostling for interviews and fans raising phones for photos. The stage now belonged entirely to her. As the broadcast cut to commercials, the battle between Leavitt and Gere was only beginning to spread. On social media, X erupted like a volcano. Hashtags like "Chug Karoline wins" and "Shut Gere down" rocketed to global trending in minutes. One user posted, "Karoline Leavitt just turned Richard Gere into a supporting actor in his own movie," with a clip of Leavitt's final blow. "Come to the American people, not from the red carpet." The post garnered 100,000 likes in under an hour. A popular TikToker quickly made a dance video with subtitles, "When Karoline knocks out Gere like a superhero," which hit 3 million views before dawn. Memes spread at lightning speed. One edited image showed Gere with a sad face, captioned, "When you think you're a Buddhist, but a 27-year-old teaches you a political lesson." Another cast Leavitt as Wonder Woman, wielding a microphone like a shield, with Gere as the defeated foe. Trump supporters on X dubbed her the Queen of Clapbacks, while some even suggested she run for Senate. A humorous post read, "Karoline Leavitt just made Gere meditate for life to forget this," with crying laughing emojis, racking up 50,000 shares. Mainstream media couldn't stay quiet. Fox News, in its evening broadcast, ran the headline, "Karoline Leavitt crushes Hollywood, a lesson for the elites." A network commentator praised, "Leavitt didn't just beat Gere, she showed Hollywood their time is up. Americans want people like her, not red carpet sermons." CNN reluctantly acknowledged Leavitt's strength, with a journalist writing, "Whether you agree with her or not, Leavitt dominated the stage with rare confidence and sharpness for 27. MSNBC, leaning progressive, slammed Leavitt as Trump's aggressive mouthpiece, but admitted she scored media points against a seasoned opponent like Gere. Hollywood stars jumped in, heating up the feud. John Voight, a longtime Trump supporter, posted on X, "Karoline Leavitt is the true voice of America. Gere should learn to listen before he speaks." The post got 200,000 likes. Conversely, Mark Ruffalo, a progressive actor, expressed disappointment. "I respect Richard Gere for his compassion, but this debate was a mistake. Leavitt turned it into her stage." Some younger stars, like Zendaya, stayed silent, but sources say they were shocked at how Leavitt overpowered an icon like Gere. Meanwhile, the Trump administration quickly capitalized on Leavitt's victory. President Trump, never missing a chance, posted on X, Karoline Leavitt just silenced Hollywood. She's America's warrior, defending truth and our policies. Thank you, Karoline. The post garnered 1.2 million likes and thousands of comments praising Leavitt. Trump allies like Senator Elise Stefanik chimed in, "Karoline is the future of the conservative movement, smart, strong and fearless in a fight." Leavitt, right after the show, appeared in a brief interview on Tucker Carlson Tonight. With a radiant smile, she shared, "I didn't come to argue with Mr. G. I came to speak the truth. The American people deserve to hear what President Trump is doing for them." When asked about G, she defiantly responded, "I respect his career, but politics isn't a Hollywood movie. It needs reality, not emotions." The interview garnered 5 million online views, solidifying Leavitt's status as a rising political star.